So, welcome everyone. Today we'll be talking about automation and how automation can be helped by generative AI, and more specifically about Ansible itself. So, first of all, we'll touch a little bit on why automation, then move to how generative AI can help us with automation, and then then move to actually seeing exactly what we are talking about and a little bit of what we expect to happen in the next few months. So let's start from the very basic. Why me? Why I'm here? I've been working in IT for the last 20 years at this point, or near 20 years, and I've been working on Ansible for more than 10 years at this point. And I now also work for Red Hat as a solution architect, so I help customers and partners to understand how they can use Ansible within their architecture and their estate. So, starting from the very basic question is why automation? The reality is that automation is one of the very constant things within human history. And if you think about it, automation happens every time a human does something and does not want to do it anymore. And it's something that we all do in our daily lives. We automate small things, big things. But the reality is that in enterprise, that is not enough, because automation can be done by everyone, but if you are a company, you want to organize that automation in a sensible way. So this is where complex, or a little bit more complex, automation systems actually raise from. And this is usually what happens in a company. You do have a lot of different users on the top with different roles, everyone focusing on their own stuff. But the reality is that all their silos are actually very similar and usually depending on the same blocks. So if you have a single way to automate everything, it makes the life easier for everyone, because they can reuse the same automation and they can understand each other using the same automation tool. Now, having said this, you could expect that by now, since automation, Ansible has been around for more than 10 years at this point, and automation in general has been part of IT for the last, 30, 40 years at this point, you could expect that anything is automated in a modern company. But the reality is that that is not the case. So why is not everything automated? The first reason is that a lot of time is actually required to automate the process. Because first of all, you need to be aware of the process, map the process, map all the different cases, automate them all, find issues in your automation, fix the issues, and continue to iterate on that system. And also, in a modern company, processes tend to change over time. So this means that every few months, you still have to change that automation process that you have written. The second issue is that a very small amount of people usually in a company are able to automate processes. All the others are maybe doing processes, are maybe consuming processes that has been automated by someone else, but they are not able to create automation themselves. And the third issue is the complexity of reusing code that has been created to automate a similar process. And the reality is that even if you are using exactly the same automation toolkit as Ansible can be, exactly the same code repository, so effectively all the automation is in the same place, your reusing code is still not that easy, because you have to read someone else's code, which might be similar to yours or not, to understand it, to ensure that actually that is doing exactly what you want to do, and then eventually reuse it. And the issue is that once you have a quite big amount of code, the amount of time that you would need to spend to simply read the other people's code is not trivial. So automation can be helped by generative AI. This, I think, well, it's obvious for the people here, but let's see exactly how. And the reality is that generative AI is nice, but we are at the very beginning of it, and there are still a lot of issues and unanswered questions. So the generative AI has the potential to help the enterprise to automate, first of all, by enhancing productivity and integrating in the user workflow to help the developer of automation to actually be more efficient in writing automation. It can expand the number of people that can create automation. Obviously, we are not talking about, let's say, organizational limits, but people that are not able or have not invested enough time to study how to create automation, they can now be helped by the generative AI tools. And the third part is the fact that we can use AI to actually scan the code that we already have to either find matching code or find issues with that code and find suggestions, and hopefully also use the AI to standardize the code as much as possible. So the issue, though, is that if you pick your code repository of AI and put it on some third-party tool, there are some issues there. The first one is obviously where the code comes from, because as we know, generative AI creates code from something, or create an output from an input, and based on the input that it got, you will get different output. But also there is a more complex issue about the input, which is what license was that code into, because that also can influence the output license. Now, it's not yet completely clear the legal framework where we are moving, because obviously different countries will have different frameworks, but also very few countries at the moment have a legal framework around AI. But in the next few years, all countries will have one. So it's important to start to think about those kind of questions, because it will be required once there will be laws in place. The second aspect is, can you trust whatever system you're using to share your data with? Because you don't really want to have your automation code to be maybe foundable online, because if someone knows exactly how you create machines, how you create and configure firewalls or network devices, obviously that can open security vulnerabilities, as well as there are IP concerns. And the third aspect is, where does the model come from? Who trained it? What it was the thinking behind the people that trained that model? How trustable it is to actually create you good results? So our solution has been creating Ansible Lightspeed in partnership with IBM, and this model is completely created for this scope, and it's a generative AI solution. So we are basing it on the Watson X Code Assistant, which is a large language model, and we are building on top of it. It's engineered to help individual teams and organizations to automate faster. So the idea is not to replace humans, but is to give humans a better way, a better tooling to do things. And if you think about, this is exactly what IT was or has been for the last 30 years. There were people in the early 2000s that by work, they remove parts of images by dragging their cursor around their borders. Now you can open any modern software to do the design stuff. You just, with a couple of clicks, you can remove backgrounds, foregrounds, whatever you want. So the idea is exactly the same. It's not to replace humans, it's just to give humans more powerful tools. The third aspect is to be integrated within the developer tooling. So at the moment, developers are using some tooling. Usually it's either Visual Studio Code or a different IDE. The idea is to be there in the tool itself. And the point is that if we want to have good output, which by good output, I mean valid YAML code, valid Ansible code, but also high quality Ansible code, we need to focus all the trainings on valid, good quality Ansible code. So that is what we did. And we embedded into the tool all the Red Hat and IBM automation expertise that we had. So Ansible streamlines the experience of creating Ansible Ansible content. So if we go to look exactly the experience, how it feels like, I have a quick demo for you. Let me find my... So this is Visual Studio Code, and usually a playbook or a role, which is very similar, but just a list of tasks instead of a list of tasks assigned to a certain group of machines and with specific details, is written as name, description of the task, because you really want to document what you're doing, and then the Ansible bits, the Ansible task itself, with the various parameters. So what Ansible Lightspeed helps us to do is, by creating the first line, which is the description of the task, it writes the others. So let's say that we want to ensure that HTTPD, which is Apache HTTPD, is present on the machine. Oh, it's present. Thanks. We can do new line, and then Ansible Lightspeed will suggest us the rest. As you have seen, it's suggesting us to use the Ansible built-in.package module. Also, we are going to pass the name HTTPD, that's the name of the package, and the state is present. Now, it understood, maybe understand is a little bit a strong word for a generative AI, but still, it guessed properly that I was talking about a RHEL system or a RHEL-based system. In fact, the name is HTTPD. If you are on the Debian side, the same thing, the same package is called Apache 2. So obviously, by the fact that I hinted in the name that I was talking about HTTPD, it understood that usually when someone talks about HTTPD is working into the enterprise Linux space. So usually after you install the HTTPD, you also want to open the firewall. That's, very standard. So let's say that we want to ensure that port HTTP and HTTPS are open. So in this case, it did something very similar. As you can see, it used the POSIX.firewalld, which is still enterprise Linux. But in this case, I did not give it any hint on the fact that I was talking about enterprise Linux, because HTTP, HTTPS ports are the same no matter on the kind of Linux you are talking about. But it guessed properly that I was talking about enterprise Linux. How did it do it? Simply, it used the context from the first task. Since the first task was on enterprise Linux, probably the second one will be as well. If I would have corrected it, the first task, to move it to maybe Debian Linux, then it would have written a different second task. And as you can see, it's using the POSIX firewalld module, which is the suggested one in this case. It's going to be applied in the change in a permanent way, so that is resilient to restarts, but also immediately, so that immediately I have the ports open. And it also using the loops, which those are all the best practices about writing this kind of module. And the last thing that we are going to do is ensure that HTTPD is starting at boot. So obviously it's suggesting us to be using the built-in service module, which is going to rely on systemd in this specific case, and start. The state will be started enabled through, so it will start immediately, as well as survive reboots. And as you have seen, what I have now is an 18 lines long playbook written in a proper way, but I only wrote 3. So obviously I wrote the 3 important ones because I was thinking about what was my process, and the machine just helped me to create all the boilerplate or the generic code around it. So another interesting feature that we have is the fact that after every generation, so in this case we are talking about the last one, there is in this tab the Ansible Lightspeed training matches, this small thing, which is the list of the 3 top results, the top 3 sources of that suggestion. So as we can see, the first 2, well, may extend it a little bit more so that we can see them all together. So they are all coming from galaxy.ansible.com, which is the place where majority of code is available. The first 2 are under Apache 2 license, the third one is under GPL, and then we have a score, a matching score. So the first 2 were 2, which is the maximum, and the third one was a little bit lower graded from the creation. So this helps us to track exactly where the code comes from and what was the license about it, who was the creator, and so on. By the way, on Galaxy, if you have published modules on Galaxy, you can choose if you want your modules, your code, to be part of the training set or not. So we are giving that freedom to people to actually choose if they want to share it with AI or not. So going back to the slides. So what have you seen? First of all, the fact that we can generate tasks for a playbook or role by giving it the description. Second, that the result is influenced by the context, and that every suggestion will include potential sources, author, and license. But also the fact that all the suggestions that it provides us were following all the best practices around Ansible automation creation. And the reason is that we take the output from the AI and then ensure that it follows all the best practices. And if it does not, we make sure to fix it before displaying it to the user. So what you have seen is the Ansible Lightspeed Tech Preview, which is available for everyone right now for free. You just have to go on the website and create an account there. And is able to do task generation. So you provide a description for a task, it will create the task for you. This is a staff-supported service, so you cannot really call Red Hat for issues around this, but hopefully you will not have any. So this is not the only thing that we are working on in this space. What we have today is the generation of playbook of roles based on that description. But in the next months, we'll see more feature coming to this platform. So the first one is going to be to find a similar role to or playbook to the one that I'm writing. Maybe there is already someone in my organization or somewhere else that has written something very similar. So in my Apache example, very probably there are many other people that have written very similar playbooks. So there is no point for me to rewrite it in a very similar way. And I don't know if you have noticed that, but we had two, in doing the source discovery, we have seen two different tasks, two different sources which scored 2, which meant that was exact matches. So very probably those people were doing exactly what I was doing. Now, this feature will be more advanced than that because it will provide us more specific insights, but it will arrive later on. The second aspect is to review playbook or roles that I have already written, or maybe in my repository, to find best practices that maybe could be implemented, or maybe I was using old ways of doing things. So I don't know if you are aware, but until a few months ago, or a few years ago at this point, the standard practice was not to include the collection name in every task. That is not considered the best practice today. So effectively, if you have old playbooks, the AI could help you to actually make it better and following all the current best practices. And the last aspect is by starting from a playbook, the AI can help us understand what would be the impact of that playbook running on a machine. At the moment, the only way of doing this is to run the playbook either in dry run mode, but that is not always giving you perfect insights for obvious reasons. So the other option would be to clone a machine and run on it, but that is not always ideal. So the fact that we can have a tool that can give us way more information about what would be the impact of a playbook, that would be great. So putting it down with a little bit more details, at the moment we have the Ansible task generation as we have seen, the VS Code extension, and it's in technical preview. So in the near term, we will have full playbook generation. So instead of giving step by step what we want to do, we will tell Lightspeed just ensure that Apache is present, the firewall ports are open, and Apache starts at boot, and it will create exactly the same, something very similar to what we created this morning. Also, there will be systems to monitor code repositories so that we can ensure that all the code in that repository stays at the quality that we are expecting, and also new features of the model will immediately be able to be used by our users. But also we will get REST APIs, which will allow a more integrated approach with different parts of the business process that automation is. And what we have seen so far was relying only on public available code. But obviously, this is not perfect for companies that already have a lot of code internally and want to keep a consistent quality of code and consistent rules within that code. So it will be possible to actually provide your own code into the model and retrain it so that it will suggest you things that are more coherent with what you're doing already. Longer term, we are going to have that content discovery and matching that we were discussing just before, as well as the content description features. But also, there will be more controls about what data gets sent. By default, it will be a very small subset, but there will be cases where people will be like more willing to share more data to get better insights. So there will be more controls over that. And also, there will be new user interfaces. I really look forward for this because I don't really like VS Code. So the fact that we will get it on other text editors, CLI, web UI, it will be very nice, I think. So lastly, we will also have custom post-processing. So at the moment, it's following, let's say, Red Hat best practices. But in some companies, they do have different best practices that they want to enforce on suggestions. So it will be possible for companies to also add their own best practices to the mix. So lastly, it will also support EDA. EDA is event-driven Ansible, which is something that allows you to run Ansible playbooks and roles when something happens in your organization. So for instance, an alarm gets triggered, you run a certain thing to fix the issue. And at the moment, Ansible Lightspeed is not able to support you in creation of rulebooks, but it will be also available at a certain point. So with this, move to questions. I know that there are here. Yeah. Okay. So is it possible to train Lightspeed with your own Ansible content? We have invested heavily into our own custom Ansible content. We and all of our playbooks seamlessly integrate with other systems in our organization. Would be cool if Ansible could learn from that. Yes, absolutely. It will be available. Obviously, there will be some security things to ensure that are met. There will be probably different options based on the fact that will be on-prem or SaaS, but that would be definitely possible. What programming languages are supported? Only Ansible. And the reason is that what we have created is something very specific for one goal, for one job. And if you want to have something that is way wider, there is the IBM Watson X Code Assistant, which is the foundational model where we have built on. They are supporting way more languages, and then there are obviously other options as well. But what we have done is just work on one specific use case because we want to have a AI that is perfect in doing one thing. We are not trying to solve any issues around coding. Are there any option to view more of the search results of the playbooks within the score before Lightspeed gives the results with highest score? At the moment, no. And I'm not entirely sure if it will be possible in the future because the way AIs work is that they find the best answer for you. And then the way that scoring and so on is provided is an afterthought. So after the execution, we are going to track back where it came from. But it's not like having multiple options. It could be that at a certain point, there will be an UI that maybe does 2, 3, 4 interrogation to the AI model and then show you the various options. But at the moment, that is not supported by the current implementation. But in theory, it could be possible. Will Ansible Lightspeed have some sort of free tier after technical preview phase ends? Absolutely. The current version, it's going to be free after the technical preview as well. Obviously, it will have the feature that it has now, maybe some more features, but basically it would be the current thing that continues to stay free. Would it be possible to use Ansible to migrate code from older version of code to newer? Yes. That will be in the suggest best practices part, because usually the issue with moving from an older version to a newer is that something changed in the best practice. Obviously, there are also modules that changed. But if you think about it, it's very unusual that a module just gets replaced instantly. Usually there is a phase-out period and a phase-in period at the same time of the new module. So in a way, it's a difference of best practices over time. Would it be possible? Oh, okay. How long do you expect the service staying free of charge? I don't expect it to stop being free of charge. That would be my expectation, but nothing is forever. So probably in years 5,000, it will not be there, but it will not be there as well, and probably will not either. Could you tell more about Ansible Lightspeed roadmap near term, REST APIs, how to integrate Ansible CD/CI pipeline using GitHub Actions? What will be the possibilities? So it will be a REST APIs where you will provide a context, a question, and it will give you answers, and then obviously the various sources and the other meta information that it has. That is the basic idea. We'll see exactly when the API will be released, the specs of the API, but the general idea would be that one. Probably there will be a GitHub action. I'm not sure if it will be an official supported GitHub action or if it will be a community GitHub action. That could also be possible. But absolutely, it will be there. And yeah, the integration will be probably some tools will be integrated out of the box. I do envision the fact that probably there will be some tools that would be, will already have a click and set up Ansible Lightspeed option. Other tools will need to have a more technical integration with the API and maybe a little bit of code written.